Hey everybody, Bearded Rogue here, and today we're doing the last of the after-action analyses for my playtests at Dragonflight, and this time we're going to talk about Stellascope. So, Stellascope is a game that is another one of my designs where I am trying to get rid of the cognitive overload that came with some of my previous designs while still visiting some of the mechanisms from those designs that I personally loved or that I felt were unique. So a lot of you who've been following along for a while may remember a game that I designed called Stocko Trucks. Stocko Trucks had some pretty interesting mechanisms inside of it. One mechanism was that it was spatial. You were moving the trucks around on a grid system, which were city streets, maneuvering them from corner to corner, and that was being done as a means of basically putting them in advantageous positions so that you could score money for them when you after you had invested in them. You're trying to get your trucks parked in the best areas of the city so that the ones that you have stock in paid out better than anything else. This game is the one that I brought to Unpub this year. I personally still very much like it as a game. However, Cognitive Overload City is basically the response that it received at Unpub. Lots of players stated that there was a ton of overwhelm involved in the game. Once they got to playing the game, and once they were about halfway through the game, it no longer intimidated them or scared them anymore. But them sitting down and seeing all of the places where trucks could go, stock investing, and various other things was pretty intimidating for a lot of players. A lot of them who otherwise would have maybe enjoyed the gameplay wouldn't even sit down to play it. This was not what I wanted for this game. Also, Stocko Trucks, being a bit silly of a theme, I don't think I personally am ever going to get away from silly themes regardless of the mechanical weight of the game. Also, I'm not as tied to the themes of my games as some people, so if a publisher wanted to re-theme it, I would totally be open to that as well, regardless of which game it is. I just have to have a theme in order to begin actually creating. Without a theme, the mechanisms don't click. They don't mean anything. Regardless, conversation for another time. So Stocko Trucks was Cognitive Overload City for people. It was one of the few games I had where I started with an end condition, a taco truck on every corner, and then managed to find a way to make the end game and the scoring for that satisfying. It worked really well, but it was very busy, very overwhelming for people, and it featured a lot of math. And so I sat down to say, well, what if I did something spatial that didn't feature as much math? Something that had a lot of the elements, particularly of the spatial variety that I loved about Stocko Trucks. And so Stellascope was born. So in the Stellascope, all of the tiles just have a star on them of a color. This is 2 orange and 1 white. I use gray so that it shows up against the white background. There's also blue and yellow, and then also finally red. So there are 5 different colors of stars: white, blue, orange, yellow, and red. And they're in various quantities in the grid. There are only 3 white stars in the grid, 4 of the yellow star, or 4 of the blue stars, 5 of the yellow stars, 6 of the orange stars, and 7 of the red stars. And for those not keeping track, that's 25 stars total in a 5x5 grid that composes the entirety of the night sky. So my initial version of this game, which I brought to GameStorm earlier this year, had very many aspects in common with the one that I brought to Dragonflight. The first thing in common was the 5x5 grid of stars, and the color distribution of those stars in that grid. The second thing that was in common is a mechanism that I brought over directly from Stocko trucks, which are these split cards. So in Stocko trucks, you would play a card in front of you, and you would use one half of the card, and then the other half of the card would be used by the player next in turn order. So the first player would take one action, and then the second player would take the action that the first player gave them, plus one of the two actions that they played, and they would pass their remaining action to the third player, and so on. So it would create a daisy chain around the table so that the first player would take the first action of a round and the last action of a round. So that was a mechanism in Stocko trucks that I hadn't seen anywhere before and that I really loved from the game, so I brought it with me here. The actions on the cards are very similar to what was in the initial version of the game that I had at GameStorm. Half of every card is a refocus on a particular color of star, and then there are 3 actions. Originally there were 5, but I'll go into why those are gone here in just a second. So the 3 actions that remain are rotate, which allows you to basically take a square, a 2x2 square of stars, and rotate them clockwise or counterclockwise, so that the arrangement of them on the table is different. Slide. Slide lets you move an entire row or column vertically or horizontally, and the tiles wrap around, so the tile that falls off the edge of the 5x5 grid moves around to the other end of the line to basically fill in the hole that was created by everything else sliding down. So that's slide. These two used to be rotate clockwise, counterclockwise, slide vertical, slide horizontal. Those were way too complicated to mess with, way too limited, so we just combined them, and now there are 2 of each in the deck for each star color. There are 2 blue rotates, there are 2 white slides, and everybody's happier. The final action is swap, which is the most powerful action in that it lets you basically take 2 tiles anywhere on the board and exchange their places. There's only 1 of these in the deck for each color of star. So every star color has 5 cards in it, for a total of 25 cards. And these 25 cards are what allow you to take all of the actions in the game. The final action I didn't talk about is refocus. And so refocus is one of the main premises of the game. So in the night sky, you will have an arrangement of stars, and I'm just going to hold some up. Okay? Let's just pretend that we have more around these. There is this little doohickey here on a star. This is the focal point of the shared telescope that all of the astronomers are using. So this star and the 8 stars around it are basically what can be seen in the telescope. So the idea is with refocus, you can move the telescope's focal point from, say, this blue star to this red star. Okay? Why would you want to do that? Well, in order to basically collect data points about the various stars. So thematically, what you're doing is you are researching the night sky, looking for planets inhabitable by humans. And on the goal cards, there are 3 stars, because my idea was to triangulate these planets. You would need to observe particular stars in particular configurations. The way that you earn these stars is basically you place this little focal point on one of the stars, and then it and the 8 stars around it, you decide on one color of star. So let's say orange, because this is an orange star. You would then gain 1 resource cube, 1 research point, whatever you want to call it, for each orange star in the area if you named orange. So if there were 2 other oranges in the area, you would gain 1 for this and 2 for those, for a total of 3 orange stars or research points, which you could then turn in on one of these cards in place of an orange, and I just happened to draw the all 3 orange. So you could turn in those 3 orange to complete this goal card. That was the basic idea, or the basic premise. Now, this game has had a total of 3 playtests, counting the one at Dragonflight. So there was one at GameStorm, one separate from GameStorm, and then one now at Dragonflight. And that's it. So I knew that there were a lot of things about this game that weren't there, but I was willing to be open and listening to the playtesters to see kind of just what felt right as we were playing. So one of the first observations was having to use the refocus action in order to claim resources meant that the other side of the card would just be ignored. Who's going to rearrange the night sky when I can just refocus on an orange star, claim a whole bunch of resources of whatever type I want, and then refocus on a red star later on to gain a whole bunch of other resources? I would always want the cards to look like this. 2 refocus actions for me. Everybody else can manipulate the grid. That's not fun, and not cool. So what I decided is that basically at the end of a player's round, they always collect research, because that's what you're there for. You're a scientist. So you always collect research, which means that you could refocus once on your turn, which is common, or not refocus at all, and instead just stay where you're at, and rearrange the night sky around where you are at to better distribute the stars for the resources you want to collect. One of the first things that I made clear is that the star where the focal point is cannot be moved by any of your movement actions. So if you want to move that particular star, you need to refocus your focal point, your focus to a different star before that one can be moved. This created some very interesting decisions where I had to decide what order I wanted to do things in, whether I wanted to leave the focus where it was at and just rearrange the stars, or rearrange some stars somewhere else on the grid and then move my focus, or move my focus and then rearrange some stars. It created some much more interesting and dynamic actions on the board. One of the other very obvious observations is that in a 5x5 grid, if you are a star that is on the edge, there are not 3 stars beneath you. Instead, you only have the stars around it. If you're in a corner, there are very few stars around you, only 3, which is much, much more limiting. So, the first rule that we declared is if your focus was on the edge, then you would get 1 more star of whatever it was you decided to collect research on. So if you were collecting white and your focus was on the edge of the board, regardless of what star color it was on, you would collect 1 additional white beyond what was present in your view. We decided on this rather than wrapping it around, and it might be correct to, if your focus is in the corner, to claim 2 more of whatever it is that you're trying to claim. But we played with just +1, and it felt very good. It was a very simple rule to keep in mind. It didn't involve wrapping your view around the sky, pretending that the sky was a sphere or anything of the sort. We were able to just simply say, if you are on the edge, collect +1 of the color of star that you choose to collect. Very, very simple, really elegant, made sometimes playing on the edge very good, because some of the stars, like white, there are only 3 in the sky, and if they're nowhere near each other, and you need to complete a goal that has multiple whites, like, say, this one, you didn't have to try to navigate all 3 of the stars in the 25 star grid into one location. Very friendly, very forgiving, very cool. And that just came out during the course of playing with other designers and saying, so, what do you guys think could fix that problem? Obviously, it's a problem. I was aware that it was a problem, but what could it possibly be? So, the next thing I'll touch on are the goal cards. And again, scoring And endgame stuff is my biggest weakness as a designer. This is no different. So the first thing I noticed when I got there is that all of the cards did not use the entire Nandek function that I used. Basically, all of these numbers should have been divided by 3 and rounded down, because nobody wants to add 14 and 9 and 18 as their scores. So, while we were at the table, as they flipped out, I just changed the numbers. So the 16 became a 5, and the 14 became a 5, and the 13 became a 4, and the 12 became a 4. You get the picture. Basically just lowering all of the point values for all of the cards so that math was doable. In addition, the endgame trigger was basically once one person has 7 of these completed. Why 7, you ask? Well, because there are 35 of these in the deck, and as the way that they are played is there's basically a market of them. And as players complete them, new goals flip out. You're able to complete 1 on each of your turns. And so 7 felt like a pretty decent amount of time to play the game. It also meant that the deck would not run out and need to be reshuffled. It meant that every goal that was claimed could stay with the person, and then all of the scoring could be done by adding up your cards at the end, which was very simple once everything was back to single-digit math. So that worked pretty well. The problem lied in that these goals are way too easy. They are all 3 stars, and all of them are very easy to complete, because the change to always collecting at the end of your turn meant that there was a larger influx of resources for every player. This is not a bad thing. This is kind of exciting. However, it did mean that by the end of the game, when we declared the end of things, basically you had enough resources to claim any goal that was out, and you just claimed whichever goal had the highest points that was on the table during your turn, which is very boring. So this means one of 2 things. Either the resources need to be capped in some way so that you can only store so many. The number of stars used to complete a goal needs to go up, maybe both. Or that there is some other resource sink in the game that bleeds off the additional resources that people are now gaining from this new way of doing things. All of those are viable options, and maybe some combination of all of them is the right answer. Perhaps you're only allowed to hold a certain number of research points, and you can spend research points to upgrade your capacity to hold more, acting as a star sink. Perhaps all of the goals need to come up in size. Maybe 5 is the minimum number of stars needed to complete a goal. Which means that now, instead of just 3 stars, you've added 2 stars to every goal, draining more stars out of the economy, and rewarding people points for doing so. Because you never want it to be that I have enough resources sitting out that I can just auto-complete any goal that is out there on my turn, and I will just choose whichever one scores the most points. Which is how the game kind of devolved by the time we played. One other thing that was noted is basically the way that the game currently plays is you are given a hand of 3 cards, and then there is a market of 3 of these cards that are out. When you play a card in front of you and take the action and then give the other action to your opponent, you then have the option of drawing a card from the face-up market to replenish your hand, or you could draw randomly from the top of the deck to replenish your hand. This meant that the game clipped along fairly well, but it clipped along in one direction. It was always the same person that you were giving actions to. While this isn't always a problem, in games where you are feeding actions to another player, several come to mind, like Puerto Rico, for example, having a seeding issue, or Seven Wonders and drafting cards, or Paper Tales, which I talked about earlier this week, and drafting cards. the direction that you're passing actions or passing cards to, being consistent throughout the whole game, can be a problem in a design. It isn't inherently a problem. A lot of games use a fixed turn order where the first player starts and turn order never changes, and it just goes clockwise from there ad infinitum until the end of the game. That's, you know, a totally viable thing. But one of the players noted that their group would have a major problem with this, and it would result in arguments over who was going to be sitting where before the game even started. This is an interesting conundrum to have, and one that I've never experienced in any of my designs. So the suggestion was that players get a limited amount of cards, maybe it's 5, or whatever, basically one more than the number of players, or whatever I would decide upon. And then, once they've played through those cards, the start player shifts to the next player, and they kick it off as the first player, but all of the cards are passed the opposite direction. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it means that players have all of the cards that they're going to use for the current round in their hand at the beginning of the round, and there is no market of these on the table. This is both good and bad. Having a market on the table means that players can choose how they replenish their hand, and specifically try to gain actions and or refocus options that they personally want. They can try to diversify their hand more, rather than being stuck with whatever it is that they were given in the draw. So that's one benefit of having a market versus having fixed hands. But in the other option, you have cards always being passed to the same person. So that's going to be a conflict in the game that I'm going to have to figure out how to resolve. I plan on trying the suggestion of giving everybody a fixed hand and then playing out the round and then shifting the start player and then playing out the round and then shifting the start player and playing out the round. And having it switch directions, because maybe that will, you know, inherently balance itself out, and all of my worries about people feeling cheated by the cards are unfounded. But, you know, I don't know. We shall see. That being said, I'm not against the idea, and I think it could be an interesting thing to try. As far as other ways of shifting the direction that it goes around the table, I'm not sure. Perhaps every time the deck runs out, you switch directions. I don't know. There's all sorts of options for how it could go. I don't know how it will go until I get it to the table again. But as we played the game was really fun, like inherently fun. Managing the spatial puzzle of where to put the stars so that I could claim the most resources, or how I could mess up the stars so that other people couldn't claim those resources, or how I needed to rearrange the stars so that I could potentially claim the resources that I actually needed to complete a goal based on what was in my hand, because, again, you can collect colors of stars that aren't the one your focus is on. So if I have only yellow focuses, but I need white, can I maneuver white stars around a yellow star so that I can get that resource? Maybe. But that's a fun little puzzle, and makes the game enjoyable. My initial idea with this game design was specifically that I wanted something that was stripped down and spatial. And I wanted something that would be easier for people to play, something that people could pick up and just get really quickly. And I think I've managed to achieve those goals. Now I just need to refine how is it that they score points, how do you determine who wins and who loses, and is there anything in the game that needs to be altered, for example, passing cards only one direction, to cater to even more people. I'm very happy with how this one is shaping up. I'm extremely happy with the playtest that I got, and the designers who playtested with me. Wonderful, wonderful human beings who were full of amazing suggestions. That one playtest has already made this a much better game than it was when I started setting it out on the table in front of you. So I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Stellascope. It's a thing, and it's a pretty good thing. Now there's just the chance to make it a great thing, and I'm looking forward to doing that as time goes on. I'll keep you guys posted on developments on this one, because it's definitely not going away. I'm really excited to work on it now, and intend to work on it as the next game that I'm working on. With King Robo being the one after that, and Warm Fuzzies going a little bit further on the back burner. Not gone, just a little bit further on the back burner while I work out these games that are already working just a little bit better. Anyway, that said, that's the last of my after-action reports from Dragonflight. Again, if you guys enjoy these at all, please let me know. I would be more than happy to do more of these in the future. I get a lot out of doing them. It helps me process the feedback that I got, and really kind of galvanize myself on a direction. It's also exciting to talk about plays of games that I have, whether they self-destructed or purred like a kitten. All of those results are valid results, and good results to get on a playtest. As long as you have a direction to go in and you learn something, no playtest is really a waste of time or an utter failure. That said, I'm going to let you guys go, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.